Welcome back, everybody. I have Jerry Marzinsky with me today, and as you might know, we had an interview a couple of weeks before that. He is a health practitioner. He has been working in this field for 35 years. He has worked in the prison system and also in a huge state hospital. So today we are going to focus on solutions. And Jerry, welcome to Nightflight.
Okay, thank you for having me again. And I'd like to tell your audience that it's no mistake that you're out here, that you're listening to this. If you're listening to this, you're supposed to be listening to this. You're one of the relative few at this point who has the light and the ability to hear this kind of information, which I have to admit is stranger than the strangest fiction. If I hadn't experienced it myself, I wouldn't even believe it. I mean, it's the kind of stuff that fiction is made of. It's like it's akin to watching a vampire movie with Dracula, on a spiritual level. So I've worked with schizophrenics and psychotics for 35 years, studying their voices that they hear, which is something that psychiatry has not done. They just deem them hallucinations without having done a single study on them at all. They're hallucinations, they're not real. And to the patient, they're very real. And if you take a cursory look at them, they run certain fixed negative patterns that repeat over and over again. They do not fit the description of a hallucination. And I found when I started working with these people, they didn't want to be talking about this stuff. It took quite a while, maybe a couple of years to figure out how to talk to them about this stuff. And if they felt that you thought what they were hearing was a hallucination, they tune you out. They just tune you out. And you won't find psychiatrists talking to them about the voices either. They'll tell them, oh, they're not real, they're hallucinations, just ignore them. And what the patient finds is when they ignore them, they get louder. All right. So, I'm very pleased to be talking to those of you who can hear the strangeness I'm about to reveal to you, because there's a lot of people who cannot. They just can't comprehend it. They can't grasp it. It doesn't fit their reality. And they block it out or ignore it. And that includes most psychiatrists and psychologists and medical practitioners. So they'll tell these people these things are hallucinations without having done a single study ever over them. Yeah.
Do you have any idea who came up with this idea that it is all chemical imbalance?
Yeah, I do. It started some 2,400 years ago with Hippocrates in Greece, who said that every physical ailment had a physical cause. Right? So that worked great for medicine. I mean, it worked real good for medicine. Through the years, they've found germs, they've found physical cause, they've had surgeons, they've found diabetes. I mean, all these diseases that were physically caused and that kind of caused the physical mechanism to break down. But back in the 30s, a doctor named, I think it was Emil Kraepelin, who was a psychiatrist, figured, okay, he'll go along with the same thing, and said, okay, he believed that schizophrenia had a physical cause also, or physical, chemical, or genetic cause also. Things got real squirrely from there, very squirrely from there. Prior to that, what they were using was psychoanalysis, which didn't work with this either. So as the number of schizophrenics mounted that they couldn't control, they ended up putting them in state hospitals where they were experimented on to do all kinds of strange stuff. And I think I have a list of, back in the 1800s, they put them in chains and straitjackets. Then they came up with, now these are all psychiatric cures based on this fella's like, okay, there's something physically wrong with these people, and we're going to try to find out what it was, and we're going to try to fix it. So before they knew anything else, they would put them in chains and straitjackets to control them because they had nothing else. Then they started, as they started concentrating in state hospitals, they would give them medics. They found out that when people threw up, were sick and threw up, they didn't cause any problems. So they would give schizophrenics medics to make them throw up, and lo and behold, for a day or two afterward, they felt, how you feel after you throw up. They didn't feel like causing any trouble or listening to their voices. They just found it awful. All right. When that worked for a short while, but they were giving them all kinds of stuff to make them throw up, and then they tried hot and cold showers. That didn't work either. So then they put them in bathtubs with ice cubes, and they kept them in there, thinking that was going to do something. It froze them to death. For females, they gave them douches of Epsom salt, apple cider, and fruit juice, thinking it had something to do with female hysteria, and it was something females' fault. When the males were, they didn't have a uterus. I mean, they had the same problem. So psychoanalysts, they didn't buy that. So then they moved to lobotomies. And lobotomies, I don't know if let me tell you what a lobotomy is. They found out that and a lot of this was they wanted to control these people because you have an institution full of psychotic patients whose voices are telling them to do all these bizarre things, including, throw feces on the walls and attack other patients and attack staff and, howl at the moon and just do all kinds of crazy irrational stuff. And they had no way to control these people. So they were looking for a way to do that. One way they found is with a lobotomy. What they would do is stick like an ice pick up through the patient's eye socket up to his prefrontal cortex, and they'd wiggle it around a few times. And they'd find out that once the guy's prefrontal cortex lobe of his brain was scrambled, he didn't cause any more problems. And I saw one of these guys when I worked at the state hospital, and they just, my initial impression was he's not quite human. They were like zombies. They didn't cause any problems, but they couldn't interact the way they used to. They couldn't work. And one psychiatrist had a lobotomy wagon that he drove around all over the United States performing these things. By the thousands he was doing this. This was before they had antipsychotic drugs. Then they found that caused the person to turn into a friggin' zombie, and they were no longer the person who they were before, just kind of like a zombie. So they found that patients who were diabetic and had been given a overdose of insulin and went into shock, voices would subside for a short while. And then they started giving what they called insulin shocks. That worked temporarily for a short while. They would shock the guy. I mean, they'd overdose him with insulin. He'd go into shock, and blah, blah, blah. And they didn't feel like causing problems for a while. So they went, oh, this works. Let's try this. When a few patients died from that, then one guy, I think is some guy he was in Europe somewhere. He found that after giving rats shocks, that they were shocks to their brain, that they were kind of sedated for a while and they weren't as active. So he went, oh, well, let's try this on humans. And that didn't go over real well in Europe, I don't think. So they came over here and no, it did. It wasn't Europe. It was the medicines that didn't go over well in Europe first. So he started using what they called electroshock therapy. All right. What they do is they got a transformer, and I watched one of these and it was horrifying. I mean, I've never seen anything. I mean, I almost fainted when I left the room. They were metal electrodes about this big, and they put paste on them and put them on each side of the patient's head, and then they'd wrap them on there. And if they didn't use the paste, the electricity would actually burn their skin when they flipped the switch. The person would go into convulsions, absolute convulsions, and just writher. but it did get rid of the voices sometimes for a week or two, which I found interesting. It worked longer than the others, and it also stunned them, so they weren't causing problems. So after you get your brain shocked, you walk around for a while going, "Oh man, I don't feel like causing any problems." They're like in a daze. So at Central State Hospital, where I started working with these people, they were administering 3,000 of these a year. You know, and the patient would wet their pants. They'd have to give them a horse needle of muscle relaxant, like this big around and about that long. It was just incredible. And I said, "Why do you have to do that?" I said, "Well, if we didn't, they would snap their bones when they went into convulsions." You know, so that would dumb them down for a while. Neurology found that even after one shock treatment, they could find brain damage. They could see brain damage. And they were given these to week after week to different patients, just destroying their brain, you know, for a temporary effect that cured absolutely nothing. And then they were kind of, it wasn't doing anything. So they were trying to figure out, you know, who or what's to blame for psychosis. And they blamed the mother. You know, it was something the mother did. They're eating the wrong food during pregnancy. And then that didn't work out. So then they blamed genetics. They couldn't find any genetic proof ever. They still don't have any. Back in about the 1800s, the late 1800s, I think it was France, in a dye factory, they were doing research on different dyes, and they found that the people working in that lab with certain dyes would become very lethargic when they were playing with these certain chemicals. And one guy took that and he says, "Oh, well, you know, this is interesting," and kind of isolated it. And I think this is where Smith, Kline, and French started out, or you know, one of the big drug companies. And they started administering it to psychotics in mental hospitals and found that it calmed them down considerably. They were much better managed, and that it would weaken but not necessarily get rid of their voices. So antipsychotic drugs were major tranquilizers that calmed these people down. They did not get rid of the voices for the most part. They weakened them and made these people much more controllable. So in the 1950s, the drug companies saw an advantage to this, and they started producing this stuff. They came over to the US and they tried it on a hospital population here. It worked, and they've been doing it ever since then. So, you know, 13,000 patients at Central State Hospital were given these kind of medications. And the drug companies right now are making $3.6 billion a year out of selling these toxic medications that merely suppress psychotic symptoms and cure nothing. You know, they're not going to want the information that I'm going to be telling you guys today out. You know, it's in their best interest for it not to be out. So that's kind of how it all started. And the pharmaceutical companies right now, if you go and you punch in any of these antipsychotic drugs, they still tell you that this is due to a chemical brain imbalance, and their drugs temporarily cure this. They have no proof for a chemical brain imbalance. There's never been any proof, and it's been proven completely wrong at this point.
When we talked last time, what I understood was that the drugs, they silenced the voices a little bit, but they never really got rid of it. Is that
well? In some cases, they do.
Okay.
Which, you know, and not to say that I mean, I've seen those drugs have some very dramatic effects. Somebody who's gone from a screaming maniac, once put on some of these drugs, will calm down considerably, and you can now talk to him. But in most cases, it doesn't get rid of the voices completely unless they're caught early enough. And I've seen a number of cases where when somebody first starts hearing them and they are given these drugs, that the voices just can't get a grip. You know, so what the voices sound like are like everyday thoughts that go through your mind daily. there's no change for the most part, in the tone or the timbre or anything like that. It's just like, well, everybody experiences them. The schizophrenics, they're still part of our race. They're still part of our population. They just experience these things more intensely, with a greater frequency, and they're much more awful. So everybody has psychotic thoughts, and the way they are experienced is you're walking along and you're minding your own business, and all of a sudden this horrible thought pops into your mind. It's like, oh, kill your mother, or something like that, or drive over this cliff, or drive into oncoming traffic. Or it's just something that you normally would never think about or perceive or ever carry out. And it just pops in there, and you're embarrassed that you had the thought. It kind of takes you by surprise. You know you'd never do that. You don't accept it as yours, and you never act on it, and you do your best to get rid of it and ignore it, but it still shakes you up because you experienced it. And with the current assumption that every thought is yours, which is not reality, you feel embarrassed that you even had that thought because you think it's yours and it's part of who you are, which is one of the that's one of the keys to understanding what's going on with schizophrenics and the rest of us as a human race. Your thoughts are not who you are, and that may take a lot of people by surprise, but people are waking up to that in vast numbers right now. If your thoughts are who you are, who is listening to them? If you can step back and watch these thoughts flow into your head, from kind of distance yourself from them, which you can do, try it yourself. Who is it that's watching? So you can't be your thoughts and take yourself apart from them and perceive what they are saying also. So who are your thoughts talking to? When you have these thoughts and they're constantly talking to you, who is it that they're talking to? So you aren't who they are. Now, what these voices do is they hijack your thought stream. They're like a mental virus. And that's the first step to waking up. Families need to understand that these, what their schizophrenic daughter or son is doing or saying is not who they are, but they believe that's who they are.
In Buddhism, they give this example that you are the ocean and your thoughts are the waves on the top, and no matter how wide it is at the top, deep down underneath, it is always calm.
That's exactly right. I experienced that one time while diving in the dark. It was all my senses were shut off, and the only thing I experienced at the bottom, the water was just bathtub warm. There was no noise. It was dark. It was a little bit kind of, what's going on down here, because I couldn't see anything. And it was like all I experienced was I was aware that I was aware. And that's what's there. And your thoughts hijack your perception. And in this case, they hijack, the schizophrenic's perception.
So what can family members do that would like to support somebody who is dealing with hearing voices?
Well, that's critical. If the family support is critical to them recovering. Okay. But they have to understand what's going on, what's really going on, not what psychiatry is telling them is going on. They have to understand what's really going on. And it may take the patient being on medications for a while before they can actually reach them. So what happens when a family member starts hearing voices and starts into a psychotic process? It's very difficult for families to understand what's going on. You know, they see that their loved one is changing. They're confused. They're hurt. They're angry. When these symptoms start showing up in their loved one, they see their loved one start pulling away from them. They isolate themselves. They don't understand why. They find that they're irritable, belligerent, grumpy, and irrational. They can't reason with them. They're doing things that are upsetting to the family. They're doing things that are making decisions that are not in the best interest of the family or themselves. And when the family tries to confront them, you know, hey, what are you doing? What you're doing is nuts. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. You're hurting yourself. You're hurting us. You're hurting everybody. They blow up and drive the family away and then isolate themselves. The family doesn't understand what's happening. They feel like they're losing control over their loved one. And a lot of times they go, well, you know, I don't even recognize who you are anymore. You know, you're not the person I knew. You know, I mean, the difference in personality is vastly different. They don't understand what's going on in their loved one's head at all. I mean, they just see this outside stuff, and the entire family is thrown into fear and turmoil, and they feel like they're walking on eggshells every time they get around this guy. And if they confront him, there's usually an explosion. And of course, the schizophrenic blames the family. Oh, it's your fault. You did this. It wasn't for you. This wouldn't have happened. I mean, yeah, you did it. Yeah, quit bugging me. You know, so the family's kind of struggling like, wait, well, did we really do this? I mean, how much of this is our fault? What did we do to do this? I mean, other people don't have kids that are this out of control. And what did we do? And so they're struggling with this. And the more forcefully they react to what the irrational stuff that the patient is doing, the worse it becomes. It's like throwing gas on a fire. And they find that the patient is constantly irritable, not sleeping, pacing the floor at night, has horrible nightmares, constantly restless, and doesn't want to be around them at all. At some point, they begin to lose functionality. They get kicked out of school. They lose their jobs. They start losing their friends. The family knows that something is horribly wrong, but they don't know what it is or what to do about it. So they're just, you know, in this, the whole family is in pandemonium. They may hear the patient talking behind the bedroom door, carrying on conversations with somebody. When they knock on the door and open it, there's nobody there, but they could clearly hear that, you know, the patient was talking to somebody. And if the patient tells them, hey, well, I'm hearing voices, you know, that's like, what? You're what? Yeah, I'm hearing voices. They're telling me awful stuff. You know, well, we don't hear them. What's wrong with you? You know, they don't know what to do with that. You know, oh, no, you're not hearing voices. I mean, it's just, you know, it'll go away. No, it doesn't go away. To them, the voices are very real. To the patient, they're very real. They carry on conversations with them. They insult them. They degrade them. They're not like word salad. I mean, all through graduate school, here's the only thing they'd say about they very seldom mention that these guys hear voices. They just say they're hallucinating and that they've broken from reality. You know, there's nothing about what the voices are saying. They make you think that whatever these voices are, they're like word salad. They don't make any sense. They're incoherent. That is far from the truth. These things are carrying on full-fledged conversations that are coherent, you know, with the patient, and they're telling them awful things.
Mm-hmm. So how do we get family members to understand what's really going on?
Well, first understand what these reactions are. So what they do when the patient starts telling friends about the voices, they start pulling away. Okay, so they learn that, well, I can't be talking to people about this, but their family finds out, and they'll drag them. You know, first the patient's trying to figure out who and what the voices are. Are they them? Are they something else? Is their brain broken? You know, and so you got two confused bodies here. One is the patient's confused and trying to figure out what is going on. Are the voices who he is? Or what are they? Or is his brain broken? Is he going insane? Don't know. There's a struggle to try to figure out. Now, if he asks the voices what they are, they'll come back and say, "We are you." On the other hand, the family is just totally confused about what's going on. So you have this whole family thrown into confusion. And this plays in with the false social narrative, the belief that we are our thoughts. It's assumed that every thought that you experience is generated in you and belongs to you. And this is what psychiatrists and psychologists believe. If they fall into that trap, the chances of the patient recovering fully are very slim. So the administration, psychiatry, psychology, and the medical establishment never ask where thoughts come from. They never ask, they just assume that it's the person who's thinking them, that they belong to them. Like we were talking about earlier, if you step back and you can watch your thoughts flow into your mind, and you can see that you are the watcher and you're not the thoughts. I mean, you're separated from the thoughts. And then think about when your thoughts are rambling in your head and talking, who are they talking to? They're talking to that silence that you spoke about previously, that awareness of who you are that doesn't belong to this. So families need to understand that, first of all, that thoughts are not who they are or who their daughter or son is, and that the voices have hijacked their thought train like a virus. So the stuff that they are saying, the awful stuff they're saying, the awful stuff they're doing, is not being done by who they knew the patient to be, but by these voices who are telling them awful things about their family, their friends, their relatives. They're no good. They really don't care for you. And the families aren't aware of this dialogue. And the patient isn't going to tell them that. Nor is a psychiatrist, who knows nothing about it because they've never studied the voices. But what those voices are telling them is rotten things about their friends. Don't trust them. They want to break up families. They'll tell them everything rotten about the family. Don't listen to them. They're no good. They're crazy. So what they're trying to do is separate the patient from the support that the schizophrenic needs. They don't want any interference from the family. They don't want any loving cuddling from the family. They want to drive that family off. So the family first has to understand that their thoughts are not their own, nor is the schizophrenic's thoughts their own. So that's the first point they have to understand. So very seldom does the schizophrenic or the schizophrenic's family have anybody they can talk to about this stuff, who understands. They go to a psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist will tell them, well, you're crazy. You're schizophrenic. You're hearing voices. You're paranoid schizophrenic. You're now a lunatic. You're mentally ill. Your voices are hallucinations. They're not real. Ignore them. In which case, if they try that, the voices get louder. They will not be ignored. And then they prescribe them a toxic antipsychotic drug. And these drugs are, they just dumb them down. They will weaken the voices. They will calm them down. They will allow the family to again reach them without all the, what do you call it, the explosiveness or the turmoil. Okay. So if the family understands what the voices are and what they're saying to them, then they can get in there and help. So it may take the medications to calm them down to the point and weaken the voices to the point where they can reach the patient. And once they can do that, if they can convince the patient that those thoughts are not theirs, that the voices do not belong to them, that will go a whole long way. And they can point out to the patient that 99% of what the voices tell them are absolute lies. They're designed to upset them and cause turmoil. But the horrible side effects of the meds, if nothing else is given beside the meds, the patients will often go off them because the voices will tell them, you're being poisoned. Your psychiatrist is poisoning you with these things, and they will point to the awful side effects and say, look, you know, you're experiencing these things. You're being poisoned by these guys. Don't take that stuff. And the attack rate upon psychiatrists by their patients is like 5 times higher than any other doctor.
Which does not surprise me.
And they go, oh, well, these guys are unstable. That's what they do. No, that's not what they do. They don't attack psychologists. They don't attack psych nurses. The attack rate on psychologists or psychiatrists is as high as it is on hospital attendants who are on those wards 8 hour, 12 hour, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That the attack rate is equivalent, and psychiatrists at the hospital, at state hospital anyway, we're only spending like 15, 20 minutes with them at a time. Oh, how's your medications doing? Yeah, they're awful. Well, let me switch you to another one. Next week they come in, how's your medications doing? Yeah, they're bad. Well, let me switch you to another one. You know, so it's like a shotgun approach. You know, so even though they say, oh, what you got is a chemical imbalance, they never measure anything. They don't have any lab work. They don't have any tests. They don't have anything to measure what is out of balance or by how much. It doesn't exist. Nor does there exist a test for a lab test or any other kind of hardcore test for any psychiatric diagnosis that these guys have made up out of nowhere. You know, it's just, you know, hey, we say this is what it is, and then a drug company comes in behind them and goes, well, we're going to manufacture medicine for this.
Yeah, and sometimes other people, especially family, can become a part of the problem.
Oh, yeah.
I would like to share the screen for a couple of seconds. I found a very short interview with a therapist. I give you a little bit of the background. The background is he has a female patient diagnosed with schizophrenia, and she's experiencing what is called command hallucinations, and her command is kill, 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 kill. Her mother, especially her mother. So one day the mother insists that also she would like to talk to her therapist, and then finally the therapist, he agrees and he splits the session in half. First he talks to her mother and then he talks to his patient. And here is what he had to say about this.
I contained myself, I retained my composure, I had a discussion with her, I was polite and nice to her. When her part of the session was over, I escorted her out, thanked her for coming. And then I sat down with my patient and I said to her, look, I have to be honest with you. There were several times while I was talking to your mother that I felt like wrapping my fingers around her throat and squeezing till her eyeballs popped. At that point, my patient looked at me startled and she said, oh my God, I know what the voice is. It's my own voice and it's telling me to kill my mother. And I looked at her and said, I can understand that. Well, what happened after that is her command hallucinations went away. I did not plan that. I did not understand before I said what I said, what the nature of her command hallucinations were or where they came from. But once that happened, it was obvious. What she was doing is she was experiencing horrific murderous thoughts toward her mother, and she wasn't able to accept them. So what she did is she projected them outside of her, and those thoughts became a voice telling her what to do. Therefore, she wasn't responsible for them. She's been voice-free now for about a year. She's not on any medication.
Okay, we leave it there. I will link to the video in the description box. So what I found
Prior
in
to that, before she came to me, she
what's
was
going
different
on?
kinds of medications. She had read about the medications and she really didn't want to be on medication. But every time she tried to come off, she would wind up back in the hospital. After she saw me, she came off the medic.
So are you still there, Jerry?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think the key thing that this fella found was, number one, he said he understood. I mean, he was actually listening to what she had to say, not going, oh my God, we got to drug you up, you know. The second thing is the patient disowned the voices. When she said, I'm not responsible for them, she had broken from them, you know. So they were no longer her. And that's exactly what I'm saying here. There has to be a division where the patient realizes that those voices that they're hearing in their head are not who they are. You know,
Mm.
they're something else. They don't have the same intention as the voices. The voices are always negative. They're horrible. They're degrading. They're demeaning, and they run those patterns. Now, psychiatry will say, "Oh yeah, they're hallucinations," but they're not random like hallucinations. They're not random like all other hallucinations. They run patterns, you know, so they don't fit hallucination. And once you realize they're not hallucinations, that there's something that don't belong to the patient, then you can start hammering on that division, you know, and pointing that out. Most psychiatrists don't take time to listen. And when he said, "Oh, I understand," you know, matter of fact, you know, I have a case history here. This is a real, if you want to hear it.
Let me just briefly interject what I found interesting as well. So her
Okay.
mother was, as the therapist said himself, obnoxious and very horrific. And it took him some effort to contain himself while she was advising him how to deal with her daughter. So once he told that to his patient, and he said, you know what, there were moments where I would have liked to kill your mother. So then it clicked within her that, okay, other people have that feeling toward my mother as well. I'm not the only one. There is really no need to suppress that. I can accept that feeling without acting it out. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah. So what the voices are trying to do is to get them to act out and believe that what they're hearing is who they are. You know, that's their mind telling them to kill. And a lot of schizophrenics were badly abused as children, you know, badly abused. So the first thing is for the family to realize that these voices they hear, the patient hears, are real to them. They're real overall, although they can't hear them. They're not hallucinations. And if they took the time to listen to them, you know, if the patient would tell them what they're saying, they'd be awful things that they're saying that they don't want to tell them. You know, so, and a lot of times the families will tell the patient, well, don't be talking about us. You know, don't be talking about us beating you, or the kind of things that go on in the family. What happens in the family stays in the family, which is very dysfunctional. And so they can't get that opinion like this. The therapist said, well, yeah, your family really is bizarre, because they're ordered not to tell anybody about the horrible things that go on in the family. So, you know, the voices go after wives. They go after husbands. They want to break up the family. They'll tell the husband and the wife, hey, your partner's cheating on you. You know, they'll say all kinds of awful things about friends and family. They don't want families together, and they go after children the worst. I mean, for some reason, they hate children. I don't know if you want me to go into one of these cases so you can experience what they're actually thinking.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Okay, this one here, it was a fellow I interviewed at the, I worked with it while I was at the state prison. He was a chronic schizophrenic. He was hearing voices for years. He had been forced medicated, so he would not stay on his medications. He committed some kind of crime, and they threw him in prison. He was hearing voices, and he shot himself in the head with a pistol to try to get rid of them. You know, apparently it didn't kill him, and he was coherent, so I don't think it did a lot of brain damage. I don't know exactly what it did. He had attempted to tell the psychiatrist the voices were demons, and they drugged him, locked him up. And you'll hear about what he was thinking when the psychiatrist told him some stuff. So this kind of mimics what you just played. I saw this guy for the first time on 4/1/2003 at 9 in the morning. He was already considered seriously mentally ill with a diagnosis of paranoid schizophrenia. I asked him in to come sit down, and I'd been looking through his chart. He had a long history of mental illness and had been in the system for a good while. They had forced medicate him. He was very volatile. His mental illness, and had a long history of mental illness in the past. I was very informal, kind of like this guy was. I mean, you know, one of the things that happens is that, you know, they're looking for you to reject them. You know, most psychiatrists go, well, you know, they're thinking these people are crazy, and they act that way, and they act like, oh, like, okay, I know what's going on. You know, you listen to me. And they're very surprised when somebody actually takes the time to listen to what they have to say, which usually doesn't go on. So I asked him if he was hearing voices. He didn't respond. And then after a few seconds, he said, they're demons. And then he looked at me to see what my reaction would be. You know, of course, the typical reaction is, oh, no, they're not. You know, their hallucinations are not real. So he was watching me to see how I'd react. And I said, yeah, I know that. And he didn't seem to believe his ears. You know, it's like, what? What'd you say? Then he said something to the effect as, last time I was in the psychiatrist's office, I felt like jumping over the desk and hitting him, because he kept telling me the voices were hallucinations. Yeah. So once you tell them they're a hallucination, you've lost them. You know, there's very little chance of reaching them past that point, because in their experience, they're very real, and they know they can't connect with you. Now, if they do buy that they are hallucinations, and that their brain is broken, and that they must take these medications for the rest of their lives, those medications eventually destroy them, and they will never fully recover for the most part. So he looked at me like he didn't believe me, and I said, yeah, I know. I said, I told him that the psychiatrists don't know what the deal is. They think they know, so they aren't looking for any answers, because they already think they know what's going on with schizophrenics. But you and I know that they don't know. They've been taught in school for years and years that the cause of voices is a chemical imbalance in the brain, and that's what they think it is. You know, they don't have a clue. And he was staring at me, and then he says, yeah, none of them know. I said, that's right. And none of them really spend any time talking to people like you. So I'm reading this off a handwritten script that I wrote at the time, so I'm having a little bit of trouble making out my own handwriting.
Said, yeah, I know that. I have the same problem.
I should have typed this out. I wouldn't have had as much problem. So you know how you write in case notes. Well, that's what I did. You know, if I could get this down within 24 hours, I remembered almost all of it. Past that point, it fell apart. So I had to get it down fast. And I told him, yeah, they don't listen to you. I said, how many psychiatrists have actually sat down and listened to you in all the years that you've been mentally ill? How many of them really listened to anything you had to say? He said, none of them. I said, that's right. They aren't listening. And at that point, he settled down, just like this gal did. He just settled down. He's going, look, somebody's finally listening. I said, how many voices are you having to deal with? He said, just one. I said, one? Yeah, you're lucky. It would drive me crazy if I had to listen to a bunch of them, he said, all at the same time. And I said, oh, I've talked to a lot of people that had droves of them screaming at them all at the same time. I said, you're lucky you just had one. Can you make out what it's saying now? So I always ask them, what is the voice telling you right now as you're sitting in front of me? And then things get very interesting. If you threaten the voices at all, it gets very interesting. But if you believe they're hallucinations, you're out. I mean, the door to that world is slammed shut, as it is with most psychiatrists. He says it's buzzing right now. It's buzzing very loudly. And when I read let me see. Oh, he said it does the same thing when I read the Bible or go to church, which is very interesting because they act up when the patient tries to read the Bible, go to church, or read anything spiritual. They kick in. They don't want that happening. And that's consistent. Right? And I said, yeah, they don't like you guys going to church or reading the Bible. They'll rebel if you do too much of that. And he goes, well, how do you know all this? And I've had him ask me, well, are you crazy too? I mean, do you hear these things too? And I'm like, well, there's times I felt like I was, because there was nobody to talk to about this. You talk to a patient, his voice is threatened to kill you. He gets all agitated. They're talking to you, saying, leave this guy alone. You're not going to go to your boss and say, hey, man, the voices are telling this guy to kill me and telling him to kill me. What I do? No, you can't talk. There's nobody who understands. And there's nobody who understands them either who's willing to listen. So they're isolated just like I was. So I'm now in their world. I can't talk to anybody except them who understands, until Van Dusen came along, I guess. He said, I told him, I used to be like the other psychologists and psychiatrists for many years. However, I never fully trusted authority. And I was indoctrinated for 8 years in college and graduate school about what psychosis and what it was. But as I watched you guys and what you were telling me, it didn't make any sense. The professors didn't like being questioned about anything. If they sensed you didn't believe what they were saying, you'd be on their blacklist. So for years, I just kind of went along with what they said. And when I came out of graduate school, I was like them. I believed these things were hallucinations. But then what I was seeing with my own eyes didn't make sense with regard to that. And I said, the first time, let me say, when these people started telling me about them, the voices didn't want them to do that. But the voices were saying the same things in many different institutions. So 2,500 miles away from the prison at the state hospital, the voices were telling these guys the same things that they were telling them in the mental health center, that they were telling them in the prison, that they were telling them in the emergency rooms I worked on. I mean, so there's no difference in the content of these voices with regard to time or distance, because by the time I got to working in the psych department of the prison, it had been 10 years since I worked, or more, since I worked at the state hospital. And yet the voices are telling these people the exact same stuff. It's like they were all programmed in the same factory. You're no good. You're rotten. Your parents are crazy. Your friends are nuts. Don't trust anybody. Don't tell anybody. I mean, it's all the same stuff. It's all like the same script. So it didn't change over time or distance. So I told them they're all saying the same thing. They all were telling people not to go to church. The voices screamed and shrieked when they did. They seemed to have a will of their own, and a reaction was against the patient. And if the patient tried to read the Bible or talk to a preacher, the voices got all upset. Now, what kind of disease would do this? What kind of disease would tell the patient not to take the medications to treat the disease? You know, and that's what the voices are telling these guys. Don't take those medications, they're poison. And the non-compliance rate of schizophrenics on medications is extremely high. They will not stay on these things. And it took me years before one female at the state hospital said the voices. I'd ask them, why do you keep going off your medications and then you go insane? Why do you do that? First they'd say, well, okay, it's its side effects. Almost all of them would say it's side effects. You ask the nurses, you ask the psychiatrists, they all saying, well, it's the awful side effects. However, when you compare the side effects to being floridly psychotic, it's like saying, oh, which one do you want? Do you want the flu or do you want the bubonic plague? And then consistently choosing the bubonic plague. It made no sense. So at that point, I came up with a questionnaire, you know, and asked them what's worse, the meds or the psychosis, and it would be all the time. It would be the meds are better than the voices. Well, then why do you keep going off your medications if the psychosis is worse than the side effects? And they would say for years, I don't know. I don't. Yeah, it didn't make any sense until that one gal came out and said, well, the voices are telling me not to take the medications. And then I started asking other patients why that, you know, whether they experienced that. So they went on to, let me see where to pick up here. So they don't like church. So what disease in the world would tell the patient not to take the medications that treat it? You know, it doesn't make sense. How could a disease be that aware? The other thing I noticed in working with these guys is that the voices don't want them to tell you anything about what they're saying. You know, so a lot of times they would come out and they'd say, don't tell him anymore, he already knows too much. And then they'd give the guy a headache. So, you know, I told him about the chemical imbalance stuff, and let me see where he picks up here. So, you know, I was telling him I understood that's what the voices do. And so he went off after I told him all that stuff, that I understood what the voices were and how they act and that they weren't hallucinations. He went off onto a raving diatribe about that he didn't trust authority either. And he didn't trust psychiatrists because what they'd done to him over the years. Then he starts out talking about sleeping with a 13-year-old girl who, if he was caught with, that he would go to prison. And he says she was also sleeping with others who were underage, but they wouldn't send them to prison if they were caught. So he's going on and on about this and the injustice of the authority. And then he goes, he asked me if I've ever read the Bible, and I said, I've read big parts of it. And he would talk about how the voices would go nuts when he tried to do that.
How could you help him?
Well, first of all, they gotta want to be helped. All right. So the first thing I'd ask these guys would be, do you want to get rid of the voices? Yeah. And not all of them want to do that, especially in the prison, because they get supernaturally strong when they get agitated in the prison. And I mean, I've seen a little thin schizophrenic toss two big prison guards around the inside of his prison cell like they were popcorn. So what the gangsters do there is they say, we don't want you taking this medication. Yeah. And then they would tell them that, hey, this guy in this other gang is after you. You know, he's trying to kill you. You better go do something about that. And they'd use them as human torpedoes. You know, go get this guy before he gets you. You know? And I had some prisoners say, when they got into a fight, he said that it wasn't me fighting, it was the voices who were fighting through me. And there were some horrendous stories about, you know, what some of these prisoners did was supernaturally strong. I don't know if I told you that in the last one or not, but
so in other words, the schizophrenics became their supernatural bodyguards.
Yeah, Yeah, and they would somehow they would provide that that information or that strength, to the patient. So in helping the family, they have to realize, the family and the patient need to realize that those voices are not who they are. Okay, and they're not hallucinations, and that they have malice toward the family and all the friends, and they're trying to divide them. And that's hard for a family to realize, and something I struggled with working in the ER a lot, because the patient knew, a lot of patients knew that they were not hallucinations. They knew that these things were entities, or malicious entities, and I knew that, but trying to tell the family that got pretty touchy. And there were some families where when attempted, they would go, "Oh, you mean to tell me that my son is possessed by something?" And it's like, whoa, you had to back off, because if that got back to the psychiatrist, it'd be like, you'd be dumb. What are you doing telling these people that stuff?
Mm.
So what has to happen is that the patient has to understand, and they can see this for themselves, the family member, that what the voices are telling them 98% of the time are complete lies. They're just lies, and they know they're lies. And the lies are designed to upset them and upset everybody around them. And if they could do like this other patient did with this other therapist, is to distance themselves and say, that's a lie, that's a lie, that's a lie, then the voices can't get their claws into them. So they're distancing themselves from the voices, and they're saying, they are not who I am, and what they're telling me are lies. If they can consistently do that, the voices will start subsiding, because what they feed off of is the negative emotional energy that they generate from those lies. And I noticed that with patients long ago, and I didn't understand why, but I noticed with all the schizophrenic patients I worked with, is after the voices attacked them, their energy levels dropped to zero. They couldn't even get out of bed. And for years, I thought that was because of the anxiety and the awful things that these voices were telling them. And then one day I was working with, two prisoners who were, I don't know if I told you this before, did I, in the same cell? Did I tell you that story before? Two prisoners in the same cell in the jail for the prison, which is the worst of the worst. I mean, I was assigned to that unit. There was one guy who was floridly crazy. He was floridly psychotic, off his medications, and he was locked into the same cell with a prisoner who had snitched off the gangs and told them of a drug deal, and the gangs wanted him dead. They'd already stabbed him a few times, and they wanted him dead so bad they were getting in trouble, so they could be sent to the central detention unit where they would have a chance to get at him. So you couldn't be under more stress than that guy, because the psychotic guy would stand over him at 3 a.m. and be looking down at him at night in the dark in his cell. So he'd wake up and here's this guy standing over him, staring at him. And the guy's crazy as a bedbug. And then the gangsters are trying to kill him on top of that. And he's locked in the same cell with this guy. But it's the best experimental situation you could ever find. So the captain of the jail asked me to come over there and interview both these guys and see what I could do. Get the crazy guy on his meds and see if I couldn't do something to get the other guy transferred. And I watched the energy level of these two guys as they came up the stairs to the interview room for the prison. And the first guy I spoke to was the guy the gangsters were trying to kill, and he just bounded up the stairs. I mean, he had plenty of energy. He came into the office and his voice was very, animated. He had a lot of energy. He wasn't really, badly depressed. He was scared. He was anxious. And you couldn't be under more pressure than this guy. Then I watched the schizophrenic guy who was hearing voices and whose voices were attacking him all the time in the cell because he wasn't on medication. He could barely make it up those steps. just barely. And then he came in and he was very depressed. He had no energy whatsoever. He was telling me about being attacked by the voices. And at that point, I realized that it was not anxiety that caused this drain of schizophrenic patients. And where did their energy go? A lot of times they would say, all I did all night was just toss and turn in bed. And they were coming in and telling me, well, I feel like I've been working out in the hot sun all day, digging ditches. That's how exhausted they were. Some of them couldn't get out of bed in the morning. They couldn't get up to eat breakfast. And all they were doing was laying in their bed, all the time. Where was their energy going? What was happening to it? They weren't using it. So where was it going? And nor did they see the correlation between the voices showing up and their energy levels dropping to zero. There were one or two of them that said, I could feel my energy leaving while the voices were attacking me.
Yeah, sure. They are draining him of his life force.
Yep, that's exactly what was happening. But that is the very last thing that the voices want the patient to know. Mm-hmm. They don't want them to know that they're energetic parasites and they're feeding off their life force. But in order to do that, they have to turn that emotional force negative first. They can't consume positive emotional energy, and they can't make it themselves. So they do to us what we do to cows. We milk the cow. We take it out of pasture, isolate it, milk it, and then put it back in the pasture to feed again. And that's what the voices are doing to these patients. They go out, they eat the food, they sleep, they rest, they generate more energy. The voices come and fill their heads with all kinds of negative crap. And then after their attacks, their energy is gone. It's drained. But what's so strange is that if you don't point this out to the schizophrenic patient, they usually don't notice it on their own. And then, they've experienced this thousands and thousands of times, most of them, these attacks of the voices. And if you go, well, listen, if every time the voices come, your energy is gone, you're drained, where's your energy going? They go, that must be your cat, huh? Oh, they're vocal. So they'd say, I don't know. I don't know where the energy goes. And said, well, did you use it? Well, no, I didn't use it. I was laying in bed all night tossing and turning. Well, where'd it go? I don't know. And then you bring up another thing, like, okay, if you stuck your hand in a fire 1,000 times, and every time the fire burned your hand, what's burning you? They had no trouble going, oh, it's a fire. Well, then you repeat, well, if every time the voices came, for thousands of times they've attacked you, and after the attack, your energy was gone, what's draining you? I don't know. They couldn't get it. They didn't know. And if you attempted to tell them that, listen, these things are taking your voices, the voices would at that instant go berserk. They would explode. They would demand that the guy get out of the office, that I was telling bullcrap, that this was all insanity, that I was stupid. They'd leave. And by then the patient understood that I understood. And most of the time they wouldn't leave. They wanted to hear more. Then the voices would tell them, attack him consistently.
I think we all know to a certain degree what obsessive thinking is. Mm-hmm. Most of us have probably experienced it while being in love the first couple of days. But this obsessive thinking, that can create a thought form. And
well, these things are thought forms, and each one of them, each negative suggestion that the patient buys into, like you're stupid or you're ugly, each one of those that they buy into generates a certain amount of negative emotional energy that these things feed off of. Now, if they can get the patient in trouble and get him thrown in prison, that's such a negative environment that they're constantly generating negative emotional energy. You know?
Mhm.
So,
And that thought form then becomes an entity attachment.
well, they're kind of already attached at that point. And they're putting these thought forms into the patient's head, they're like fishermen, you know, okay, they want to get you upset, and you kind of go, okay, try this. Right? And what they have is complete access to the patient's memory.
Mhm.
They can go in there and they can pull up every rotten thing you've ever done in your entire life, stuff you've forgotten 20 years ago, and bring it to the forefront and go, look at what you did. You know, you're a rotten person. Look at what you did, and get you to obsess on that over and over again. And while you're doing that, you're generating the negative emotional energy that they're feeding off of. And this doesn't just happen with schizophrenics. It happens with all of us. We're all under attack by these things to different degrees. And once you realize that those aren't your thoughts, those don't belong to you, these are coming in from somewhere else, and you tune them, you go, well, I don't want that thought. That's, you know, you're not my thought form, leave. And they go.
So let's have a look at what parents should avoid or what can we do as parents to assist our children that they have a healthy start and mentally stable.
Well, the first thing that comes to mind, and I have another case that I think is a little more coherent than my scribblings on the last one that'll point out what not to do. But one of the things that kids start out with is, you know, when they want something, they start screaming, I want this, I want this. And you say, no, you can't have that. I want this, I want this. No, you can't have it. Well, I want this, I want this. Okay, here, take it. You know. What you're teaching them when you do that, when you give in to them like that, is that if they scream loud enough and hard enough and make your life miserable enough, that they'll get what they want. And if the parent gives in to them enough times, it's like teaching them that, well, if you make somebody miserable enough, they'll give you what you want. You know, and they go through life with that programming. So either, you know, give them what they want right away, or don't give it to them at all. You know, and a lot of times you can't give them stuff that that's going to hurt them or hurt other people. You know? So, you know, that's one thing. The other thing is for them to have be brought up in with a spiritual background, to understand that there are angels out there and that there are negative forces out there. You know, if they have to understand that if the bad things exist, the good things exist too. And if you look at what the TV programs and the mainstream media and what all these broadcasting stations are doing, I mean, they're transmitting to kids hundreds of thousands of murders on the TV. They're watching them in real time, you know, before them. And it's like, oh yeah, if you get mad, what you do is kill somebody. I mean, that's the message they're being given. You know, and with these violent video games where you're killing everybody, you know, oh yeah, it's okay to kill people. Yeah, and they're making a tremendous amount of money doing that. And the psychological research shows that this is not good, that it increases violence. You know, and they'll come back with all their lawyers and stuff saying, oh no, it doesn't increase violence. Psychologist Joe Blow says it doesn't. You know, do not allow them to play these violent video games, you know, because you're programming them to be violent. Do not allow them to watch negative stuff on television, you know, these murder mystery shows, these criminal shows, this negative stuff. Don't allow it. Just don't allow it. You know, the people who perpetrate this stuff are making a great deal of money. And they're saying, well, this is what they want to see. This is what they want to watch. This is what they want to play. You know, it's kind of like, well, if somebody wants to drink strychnine, I mean, let them have a certain amount of it. So what? Doesn't kill them right away. That's one thing. And the voices are consistently anti-religious, anti-spiritual. Now, one thing you have to watch for is a lot of churches are controlling. They're very controlling. And I'm talking about spirituality now. I'm not talking about a religious dogma.
Yeah, I was just going to say I'm not a huge fan of religion either.
Oh yeah, I'm not either. But I had it crammed down my throat, and there's some that there's a show called Off the Left Eye that's put out by the Swedenborg Foundation on YouTube. Emanuel Swedenborg was a Christian mystic who lived 700 years ago and had access to heaven and hell. And he'd come back and he wrote hundreds of volumes about what he saw. And he completely described these negative entities as evil spirits. And what he described matches precisely what Sherry and I have seen and experienced from these negative entities. So that's a very good show to watch. It's not pushing anything. It's a very spiritual show. It exposes what these things are and kind of how they work. Now, I don't know if you want me to read the second case, but it's exactly what you shouldn't do.
Okay.
With a kid.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And
so
I also think that it would be a good idea not to abuse your children.
Oh yeah, because these things are like sharks in the ocean that smell blood. A kid who is abused is being damaged psychologically, and they can smell that damage. They can smell that negativity. They can smell that fear. They can smell that hurt. And then they come and they pour gasoline on that fire and light it. Okay. And that's what they do to all of us. And since they have access to your memory, they go in there and they will pull up something that you did that you feel guilty about, and they'll bring it up and they'll go, yeah, look at what a rotten person you are. You did this. How could you dare do this? I mean, and they'll have you obsessing over that, for however long that takes, until you kind of get over it. And all the while they're feeding off you.
Mm.
So,
and if you do not know how to snap out of it,
well, you realize that those, that thought form is not yours. It's not one you want to entertain. But they are showing you where the psychological damage is. So if you trace that in and go, okay, what's there and how do I fix it? Do I apologize to the person? Do I forgive the person? Do I sit with it a while until I get over it? But they're pointing out where the damage is because they know where it is, and they're like fishing for it, like seeing if they can hook something in there, and they bring it up and they're, here, try this. You're going to get upset over this? Oh yeah, I'm going to get upset over that. Oh good, here, take more of it. So they just keep piling more and more and more on until you're all upset and worn out. And then you can feel your energy being drained. So they hit all of us. It's not just schizophrenics. Psychotics have a lot to teach us about who we are. They are part of who we are. The difference is they experience these negative thoughts more intensely, more frequently, and they're much more real to them. And what's strange is that when they get strong enough, they move from inside the person's head to outside, and they speak to them as if somebody's talking to them outside of themselves, which is really spooky. When that happens and you see nobody's there and somebody's talking to you, you can't go to your friend and go, hey man, this voice is talking to me from 3 feet away and it keeps telling me all these awful things. Who's going to understand that? But what's strange is that the patients at the state hospital, in order to drown these voices out, they would wear headphones and turn the music up real loud. That would drown them out so they didn't have to listen to them. And it worked to some degree along with their medications. But what's interesting is I had one patient tell me who was hearing the voices on the outside. He said if he put in earplugs, it would blot them out. Which I went, whoa. So they were physically hearing them as if they were outside. And the earplugs in that case worked where they didn't work when they were hearing them inside their heads. I found that to be very interesting.
Mm. And another thing, we are usually conditioned to be always nice people. But we all have a dark side.
Oh, yeah.
And I find it important to make peace with that we have a dark side, embrace it, but there's no need to act on it, but at least accept it, investigate it, and then integrate it. So
right. Exactly. Realize that it's there, that's a button that these things can push that sets you off. Yeah, and that's all they need when they're feeding is like, oh yeah, I know this person feels guilty about this thing, so I'm just going to go. When somebody says something that is similar, to the damage that was done, or reminds them of the damage that was done them, they just push that button and boom, it goes off, and it goes off really fast. So a lot of times, if you just sit back and you feel like punching somebody, and you go, okay, what's happening? What's going on here? You'll see that they were pushing your buttons, and that's something that needs to be healed within yourself, and either worked on or forgiven. But they're showing you where the damage is.
Yeah, and I guess that is exactly what this other lady experienced, where we watched this short YouTube clip, that the second somebody else admitted to her that, you know what, I have the same feeling toward your mother, she's horrible.
Yeah. Right. It's like, yeah, she is obnoxious, But yeah, a lot of these guys, especially in the prison, I wouldn't look ahead of time before I started working with them to see what they did, because that would bias me, because some of the stuff they did was really, really horrible and frightening. And a lot of them weren't on their meds. We had to get them back on their meds. But when I did look, and you looked into their background, they were horribly abused. They were horribly abused. And that damage was internal, and these things move in on that. And that's what this case is right here. So this was on 10/8/2002, when the guy came here. This is a prisoner. Comes into my office, and I said, how long have you been hearing voices? He said, I've been hearing them since about 7 years old. Now, when they start hearing them that young, for a long time, they think everybody hears them. And it takes them a while to realize that other people don't. He said, I said, did anything happen to you back then? He goes, oh yes, my mother and father would abuse me terribly. They didn't want me. They kept giving me away to each other. My father told me my mother was a whore. She was screwing other men. My dad was very mean to me. He would do all kinds of bad things. He would make me disappear from myself. He was so mean. And I asked him, well, what do you mean, disappear from yourself? And he said, I would actually leave my body while he was beating me. I didn't remember the beatings when I came back. I would go back, and I would be all beat up. So he would actually just leave his body. And I've spoken to a lot of people where that had happened. They just leave, and then they come back later. He would punch me. He would kick me. He would drink. I said, was he an alcoholic? Yes. How often would he beat you? Every day. He would be yelling at me, tell me bad stories about my mom. I would think he blamed me for it. Did your mom ever try to protect you? I don't think so. She would send me back to my father. She never did anything for me. She never made me food or paid attention to me. She always had bad guys over at the apartment. And what do you remember seeing when those bad guys were there? Well, what were the bad guys doing? They would fight with my mother. They'd spend all her money. They'd beat her. They were always going to the racetrack and leaving me alone at home. I was like 6 years old at the time. Even when they were home, they were locked in the bedroom all the time. And my mother ignored me. She wouldn't give me any food. So, that's another thing. Don't ignore your kids. Give them attention before they act out. So, because when they're acting out, you're reinforcing that acting out. When they're doing something good, or when they're just laying around and playing, or give them the attention then. Because if you wait until they act out, then you're actually reinforcing that they can get attention by acting out.
Mm.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I said, I asked him, what did you hear from the bedroom? Well, a lot of fighting. What happened if you knocked on the door? My mother would tell me to get away, to leave them alone. He said, I would kick the walls. They still didn't pay attention. Then I ran away thinking that my mom would give me some attention if I ran away. So here he is craving attention. Or I got into trouble. Maybe she would give me attention then, but nothing worked. So, did you have any bigger brothers or sisters? Yes, but my brothers didn't want me around either. They didn't want me to go with them, and then they would send me home. How old were you when you heard the first voices? 6 or 7. Inside your head or outside? He didn't answer that. He said they would tell me I was a bad person and people were going to hurt me. All right. So that's the start of it. You're a bad person. Everybody hates you. You know, they're after you. People who treat you nice are just faking it. You know, they don't really care about you. They're just faking it. And this is consistent. You know, all the voices say the same things. I mean, you can write down on 3 or 4 sheets of paper what the kind of things they say, and it's always the same bad, rotten things. Or they you know, somebody says something offhand to you, and they go, well, what did he mean by that? Oh, he meant that. Oh, that SOBs. You know, they get you to interpret what somebody says the wrong way. I asked, did they ever move outside your head? He said, yeah, they were both inside and outside my head. And what kind of stuff did they tell you? They would say I was stupid. I couldn't do anything right. That my parents acted that way because of I was no good. I messed up their whole life. I said, did you believe that? He goes, yes. Don't give your kids those kind of messages. You know, you're stupid. You're no good. How could you do something like that? You know, casting blame on them because you're, you know, and that's easy to do when they do something stupid. You know, you got to kind of choke that back because you're programming them. I told him, your parents were messed up before you ever got here. And then he spaced out. He started staring into space. And I knew the voices were active. I said, what are the voices telling you right now? He said, they're laughing at me. I said, do you believe you have a guardian angel, or do you believe in God? He goes, yes. I said, well, then ask your guardian angel for help now. And you know, ask him for help in shutting those things up. And he comes back and he says, they won't let me concentrate. They won't let me think. They're screaming at me so loud, I can't say anything. I can't say anything anymore. I'm afraid. Yeah. So yeah, that's one thing that was, you know, when the voices are threatened, they start screaming so loud that the patient can't hear what you're trying to say. You know, they block you out. You know? And unless you can slow those voices down with medications or know how to do it spiritually, that wall stays there. You can't get through to them because the voices get so loud. And then he goes, I can't say no more. I'm afraid my dad is going to hear me and make things worse on me. So his dad was already deceased, and he was hearing his dead father, who had abused him all this time, coming back and telling him these things. Yeah. So the voice had convinced him that his father had come back from the grave, and that it was going to continue to torment him even after he was dead. And I've heard 2 cases where that was exactly the same. And I said, you know, screw your father. I said, that's not your dad. And he would also hear a baby crying, which I thought was odd. I said, that's not your dad, and the baby crying is not your baby. I told him, and we talked before, I said, remember, they have access to your complete memory. They can bring up memories of your baby crying as well as everything that your dad said to you. And I said, I remember another guy I worked with where the voices disguised themselves as the guy's abusive father. That isn't your baby, and the voice is not the voice of your father. They're trying to block you from hearing what I have to tell you. He said, yes, they want me to leave now. And I said, I want to make it clear that you can leave anytime you want to. I want you to know that you're free to go. There will be no repercussions, that you're not trapped here. You can walk out the door anytime you feel like it. No questions asked. And then he struggles to clear his voice, and his voices are raging. He looks down and he's preoccupied, and he's having real problems concentrating. I said, go ahead, push it through, and ask your guardian angels for the help you need. And he concentrated, then finally speaks out. He says, oh God, help me get rid of these things. And then he sits quietly for a while, looks up, and asks, can I leave now? And I asked, are they gone? And he said, yes. I said, are you sure? Because it sounded like he was just kind of, I'm just saying this to get you off my back. And he looks at me kind of tentatively, and I said, are they gone? And he goes, yeah, they're gone. I said, okay, go ahead. I'll catch you the next time around. So
let me try to give a summary, and you remind me if I left something out. So we need to understand we are not our thoughts.
yes.
The medications in the initial stages can help. It is important to, as family members, friends, to let them talk about the voices. Don't be afraid if somebody tells you, I'm hearing voices.
Well, I'd be careful about that until they were medicated.
Okay, yeah, that's why I said in the initial stages, it's...
Yeah. Now, the other thing to add to that is that every voice that comes, or every thought that comes into your mind, which is negative about yourself or others, that's them putting it in there. And that goes for all of us. Yeah. That is not your thought form.
The predator.
It's the predators, right? So, go ahead on with your summary there, and we'll sharpen it up.
So, accepting our negative side.
Yeah, I'm finding out what is there, what pushes your buttons, and what's buried there. Let me give you an example. This happened to me. Knowing this stuff, I was out working in the backyard with a machete, chopping cactuses. I live out here in the desert in Tucson, and we don't have lawnmowers. We use machetes to cut back the cactus and the trees and stuff. So here's my dog running around out there. Beautiful dog. It wasn't causing any problems. Sometimes she does, but this time she wasn't. I had the machete in my hand, and she's running around and, digging up things. And here comes this thought into my head, chop her head off. And I'm like, what? What? Chop her head off? And it's like I'm shocked. And it's like it stunned me. It absolutely stunned me to have that thought. And then I obsessed over it for a good while. And I'm like, okay, you're not going to do that. That's nothing that you would ever do. Why are you having such a strong reaction to that thought, which is just, thrown in there? And I started thinking about that. And, like, okay, what's in there that I haven't dealt with that they hooked? That when they pushed that button, they hooked. Yeah. And I was thinking back to a time like I was 6 or 7 years old, and I was in the backyard shooting a bow and arrow, into a box with a target on it. And our cat kept running in front of the target. And I kept taking him and throwing him out. And then he'd run in front of the target again. He kept throwing him back and forth. And then, it was a big box. So I went, okay, well, I'll teach you a lesson. It's 6-year-old thinking. Throw him in the box and shot the arrow at the very top of the box. Where I didn't think he would be, because it was a tall box. The arrow went in the top of the box. So I went in, okay, well, that ought to scare you enough. Get out of here. And I opened the box, and he had been standing on his hind legs up to where his head was where that arrow was, and the arrow had poked out one of his eyes. And I was horrified. I was absolutely horrified. I was like, oh my God, what have I done? I was like, oh, yeah, God, I obsessed over that forever, and I never told anybody about that. I kept it to myself for, 60 or 70 years. And it was like, it was just such a horrifying thing that I had done. That I had gone overboard to treat all the cats we had especially good after that. And it was just there. I'd never dealt with it. It was buried alive. And they were able to go in there and pull that up. And they threw that thought in there. And boy, they got a nice reaction from that. And I obsessed over that for a long time. And it was based on that action that I'd never forgiven myself for.
Okay, no alcohol and drug abuse would be a good idea. That is also an easy portal for entities.
Especially amphetamine. Methamphetamine, the prisoners called the devil's drug. And I've seen more people go psychotic on amphetamine and stay that way in the prison than any other drug any other drug in existence. I mean, bar none. Not cocaine, not alcohol, not any amphetamine. And what they do is they'd start seeing the shadow people. These are three-dimensional shadows in the shape of people. They didn't have any faces. Most of them didn't see eyes. And if they saw the eyes were either lime green or red, which aren't really nice colors to be seeing in somebody's eyes. And this was pretty consistent with both people who were schizophrenic. They would see these things off drugs even. The meth people would see them while they were using meth. They wouldn't speak for the most part. They hardly ever spoke to them. They'd just appear in their bedroom, standing over them. They'd be darker than the rest of the room. They'd walk through walls. They'd walk up the hallway. They'd turn on the light and they'd disappear. And this is consistent among all of them. So the amphetamine abusers would say, well, after seeing those, they'd say, well, I started hearing voices talking to me, and they weren't good voices. And then when they came down and the drug was out of their system, the voices disappeared. Now, this may happen, for several months. They'd use the meth, they'd hear the voices. When they came down, the voices would disappear. They go, oh, well, that was just a hallucination from the meth. Then one day they didn't go away. They stayed and they were there forever. Now they were psychotic. These voices had gone, they'd gotten in there now. They were there. So you'll notice that, on the U.S. border right now, the Democrats are fighting Trump to keep that border open because there's amphetamine flowing across that border by the ton. The dark side does not want that stuff stopped. They want to get as many people hooked and psychotic as possible. And Trump is fighting that to the max. And the Democrats are refusing to cooperate with any kind of legislation to close off that border.
Okay, so what would Jerry Marzinsky do if you had all the money that you needed, you had a hospital, and you are in charge? How would you restructure it?
Well, I know what I would do. What the system would permit is a totally different story.
No. You have the permission. You don't have to. That is just a thought experiment. You have the permission. You have all the money in the world. What would you do?
Well, I would have psychiatrists on board to provide the initial medications to weaken the voices. Okay. Because some of these guys are so far gone that you cannot reach them without those medications. There's some patients I talked to, I was only able to reach for 10 minutes, and that's it. You couldn't reach them anymore. But getting a psychiatrist to believe what's really happening is a totally different story. So we'd start with the meds, try to teach them that these voices are not who they are and what they're doing, and then start getting them to use the That's a Lie program, that what they're telling them are lies, and not to believe or react to them. Then you need to work on the stuff that the damage that they have in themselves, and get them to process that stuff and start working on it, or forgive others who have damaged them. And that's why the Bible says it's so important to forgive and not hold that stuff, because that's the stuff they feed off of. And the last private psychiatric hospital I worked at, the psychiatrist there saw that schizophrenics were coming out of my office and their voices were gone. And he asked me several times what I was doing, and I couldn't tell him. So after I retired from there, I told the hospital administrator, I said, what I'd be willing to do is come back and teach your chief therapist what I was doing so he could do the same. All right. She said, okay, that's fine. So I went through all the volunteer procedures. It's like being hired again, got back there, and then she goes, I want you to run groups. And I said, no, that wasn't the deal. I was going to teach, your chief therapist what's going on. Well, then I want you to deal with any patient the psychiatrist sends to you. I said, not all the patients psychiatry sends to me are going to be amenable to this. They have to be they have to understand. And if they believe that the voices they want the voices, or that their minds are broken, or that they don't want to get rid of them, there's nothing I'll be able to do about that. And then it got down to, I said, listen, this is what I agreed to. This is what we agreed to. And she goes, okay, let me check with, what do they call it? Risk management for the hospital. And I told her, I said, what I'll be doing is working with the voices, and they are not what you think they are. They are not hallucinations. And I said, I'll take you as far down the rabbit hole as you want to go. But this is going to be totally different than anything that's been done before. Now, they'd call me from home sometimes and tell me to go deal with a psychotic patient on the floor who was so out of control that they couldn't even bring him out of control. So they saw that, what I could do, but I couldn't tell them how it was done. And she went and checked with risk management, and risk management says, don't risk it. It's a non-conventional therapy. And if you'll notice, when you get I do have a therapy license, but they don't permit this kind of stuff. It's like, okay, these are the therapies that we acknowledge, and anything outside of that is...
Okay, but we are building right now your perfect hospital. What would you do? How would you restructure it?
Well, I'd have the therapist understand what was going on.
So in other words, there is something, an additional education.
Oh yeah, there's a lot more. Besides knowing, you have to know the truth before you can tackle it, for sure. So the people that I would hire as therapists would be spiritual people who understand this kind of stuff. And I'd probably also have them read Swedenborg's Heaven and Hell, where he talks about these things. Watch Off the Left Eye, that series, and work with them and actually show them the reaction of these voices when they're challenged. So you'd have to get the permission of the patient.
No, you already. Okay, of the patients. Okay.
Yeah, to work with them and show them this kind of stuff. Getting psychiatry to. No, I don't know. I think that's a lost cause. But you'd need to have somebody who could prescribe these antipsychotic medications for a while until the patient realized what was going on. You could reach them and then withdraw them as the patient got better. Not say, okay, you got to be on these for the rest of your life as they're rotting out their peripheral nervous system and causing brain damage. It's a crutch. Yeah, ka-ching. Yeah, it's a crutch. Those medications are a crutch. They shouldn't be used on a long-term basis. They're toxic. They're poison. So it would require an entire change in the narrative and perception of what is going on, with these people. And if they hear that from the patient's own voice, they're more likely to realize it. But a lot of these mental health psychologists and psychiatrists have been programmed for years and years and years to believe what they're taught in medical school, and their egos are so humongous that they can't possibly conceive that there's another paradigm, that there's another world, and spirits exist. And that's pretty strange for a Christian nation, where 23 times in the Bible it was mentioned where Jesus cast out demons out of possessed people and they returned to normal. That's just blown off. That's, that's Bible times. I mean, in our times, these things don't exist. I mean, we got science now. They've gone long away. I mean, so it's
Scientism.
yeah.
Mm.
It's going to be a long uphill fight. But the people who are listening to what I'm saying here and have the light to see and hear what's going on, they'll start seeing this for themselves. First in themselves, they'll see that the thoughts that they have, if they step back, they'll see those thoughts are not who they are. And that's something. That's the first step in the evolution of consciousness of mankind.
Mm. Would you try to integrate family members and friends in that healing process if they are available?
Yes, that's critical. But then you run into the same problem again. The family goes, "Oh, you're telling me my son is possessed?"
Yes, that is exactly what I'm telling you.
And then they run to the administrator and go, "Oh, he's telling me my son is possessed."
No, that you are the administrator.
Oh, then they go to the medical board, or they go to the psych board or something. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's going to be a long uphill battle. That's why I don't waste any time talking to psychiatrists, because they're a lost cause. Psychologists are a lost cause. It's the ground level people who have lived with schizophrenics and have schizophrenic family or friends or who can relate to what's going on, that I'm spending most of my time with. People who can hear and listen to this very strange message. It doesn't fit the scientific narrative. It doesn't fit what psychiatry is telling you. It doesn't fit what psychology is telling you. It doesn't fit. It's a whole different paradigm. And that's what it's going to take, is a paradigm shift.
Yeah, but as you know, everything starts with the imagination, imagination. And
well, you got that.
It's okay to spend some time mentally on the subject. How would I do it? How and see it, take it shape. You know what I mean? But
you mean to get a taste of what
that could be, what that might look like, what I know what you are saying, and you are right, it's an uphill battle. But if we do not start to think and imagine a completely different way, then I think it will be harder.
Well, that's kind of what I'm putting this information out for.
Mm-hmm.
I've been blocked every time I've tried to do something like this. And if I would, if I wasn't retired now, and if I was practicing, and there was one complaint, oh, this guy's telling me I'm possessed, I have, if there were 2 or 3 of those, I have no doubt that the licensing board would take my license. None. So it's like they have no tolerance for another paradigm. The drug companies are making $3.6 billion a year selling antipsychotic drugs that cure nothing. They make up these diagnoses, these disorders by the hundreds. I think it started off with, maybe 10 or 20. Now it's up to like 376 different diagnoses and psychiatric disorders. And then the drug companies come around behind that and say, oh, well, if you're feeling this stuff, we have this drug that'll wipe it out. You just take this and you won't have to deal with your problems. You won't have to deal with your wounds. You just take this and turn yourself into a zombie and you'll be fine. Here, antidepressants, here's anti-anxiety drugs. I mean, just drug yourself, and the whole friggin' society is being dumbed down. They're being taught that you don't deal with your own problems. You don't deal with your own pain. You take some drug and wash it out. it's insane what they're doing. It's totally insane.
Yeah. And emotions are not there to be feared. They are just informing you.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, oh, keep yourself in check. You know, it's like, don't, listen to your logic. Don't listen to your emotion. It's a very sick society that we have now. You look at television, those commercials, it's like one new drug after another, after another. I mean, you're just being bombarded with messages like, oh, if you got this, here's the drug, and then 6 months later, here's a lawyer comes on. Well, if this drug rotted out your liver or killed your pancreas, we got a class action lawsuit now. Here, join the lawsuit. You'll maybe get a few $100, and here's the drug companies made off with millions of dollars selling this crap. And it just goes on, and they've bought off Congress over here. I mean, you look at one of the strongest lobbies in the U.S. Congress is the pharmaceutical industry. Now it's almost like you can't sue them anymore for the damage their drugs are doing.
It's the same here.
Is it? Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, but you look around at what's happening. Consciousness is changing. You got the French over there going, "Hey, we're tired of your crap. We're going to just be throwing fits every weekend until you understand that your political system is not the one we want." And then you got Merkel over there doing her deal, and then over here they're just doing everything they can to kill Trump. The deep state is just throwing one thing after another at him. They've tried to assassinate him. They've tried to denigrate him. They've done everything they could, and they're still doing that. To try to.
Trump to me is no savior. He is in on the game as anybody else as well.
Well, he is. What I'm waiting for is an indictment. I mean, all the information is coming out.
No indictment coming.
Well, that's what I'm waiting for.
Yeah, but it will.
There's a lot of talk. There's a lot of talk, and I'm waiting.
I know. The state will not go against the state, and he and the Clintons go way back, and they're best buddies. And
he's saying a lot of bad.
This clique of people, they do not arrest their own. That's total nonsense.
Well, I've seen that with the central bankers. Every time they've caught them doing illegal stuff, nobody went to jail.
Of course,
it was like they had Teflon backs. But boy, I'll tell you, it's causing real furor over here now. All this information is coming out and being presented to the public. The mainstream media over here is completely controlled by the deep state, except for one.
Media is completely controlled. It's everywhere the same.
Well, you go to the internet, and there's people out there speaking the truth. It's like the people are getting to the point where they've had enough. They've had enough. They don't want any more of this crap. Trump is starting to gain favor over here, but like you, I'm waiting for the indictments. He said a lot of bad things.
I'm not waiting. I know that they will not come. That was this entire QAnon thing, the QAnonsens. It is savior programming, and any savior programming, you can bet your head on it, is total nonsense. So whenever I stumble on the savior programming, I say, yeah, okay, fine, will never happen. Of course it will not happen. I'm not waiting for any indictment. It will not come.
Well, all I can say is I hope you're wrong.
Yeah, I know.
I hope you're wrong this time. What they call it? They call it hope porn. Hope porn, I think they call it over here.
Yeah, they are selling hopium.
Yeah, hope porn.
Hopium and hope porn. Yes, yeah. Look, as long as the crowd thinks something is going to change. Oh, no, not this month. Yeah, maybe next month. I remember when Kavanaugh was accepted to the Supreme Court, they went ballistic. Red October, get ready for Red October. Martial law is coming, arresting the cabal. First of all, really, you want to have martial law in your country? Are you nuts? Martial law means shoot first, ask questions later.
Yeah, right.
And who is telling you that that is for the cabal? So a faceless guy, a faceless group is telling you, oh, martial law, yeah, that is for the others, no problem for you. Yeah.
Well, what we have seen over here is these trains, these prison trains that,
Yeah, they are for you.
yeah, they would move them into Texas, and they would say, Texas is the enemy.
Yeah.
We're going to do a mock-up like Texas is the enemy, and that we've lost control of Texas, and that they're rebelling. And they'd move these prison trains in with handcuffs and all. I mean, they have them; they exist. You know? And what was the other thing they're doing? Somebody spotted a 1.5 mile long train with armored vehicles and armored personnel carriers headed for California. You know, just a couple of weeks ago. They've been trying to take away the guns over here forever. You know, and that's a battle that they're just chipping away. Now they're making ammunition super expensive. Obama got to the point. Well, what Obama was doing is he was trying to get a agreement with NATO, where it would be an international agreement to remove our weapons by treaty. And Trump found that, and he decimated it. Okay, so that's nothing the deep state would have done. They want those guns. Trump stood up and said, no, you're not taking the guns.
Yeah, but he is rolling out 5G. He is telling people now, I saw him lately on the news, that people have to take their vaccine shots. They're very dangerous. They have to take their shots. He's doing all the bullshit that the others are doing as well.
Yeah. Well, that one thing, I mean, they want those guns bad.
Yeah.
They want those guns very bad. He did block that. So, you know, that's a big thing in his favor, you know, because the population over here is armed. And
at the end of the day, you, the people, will decide that.
Oh no, they've been trying to take that forever. You know.
Yeah, I know, but you know, if you do not give them away, then you do not give them away.
Well, you know what they did in Australia is they went and confiscated them.
Yeah,
but everybody I know,
and nobody shot back.
And nobody shot back. I don't think that's going to happen here. You know, if they try to take the guns, I think they're going to be shot at. You know, and other people will bury them. And a lot of people have unregistered guns. But you know, you look at what we'd be fighting against is tanks and armored vehicles. You know, and Obama tried to militarize the police force here for years. He was giving them armored personnel carriers that a 50 caliber bullet cannot penetrate the windshield. You know, there's not a whole lot you can do with a semi-automatic rifle against something like that. So Trump stopped that. You know, so he's done some things that appear to indicate he is trying to stop them. You know, he would not have done that. He would not have blocked the weapons confiscation if he was totally with them. But you know, like you said, the story has been for decades is you get all this hope porn and then nothing happens.
Exactly. And I'm so sorry, we totally derailed from our topic.
Yeah, it has. But, you know, on the other hand, it hasn't, because these guys, you know, the deep state they're crawling with these things. You know, they're crawling with these things. It's control, greed, you know, enslavement of the population.
Yeah. And the predator is helping with that.
That's right. You know, the predators, it's like they're ruling over this. You know, it's like they're just watching over the whole thing. They want no insurrection.
Yeah. Jerry. Wonderful presentation again.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm glad to do this. I understand more than anybody else how bizarre this stuff is, and for decades I denied it to myself. I mean, I denied it well past the point where the evidence was overwhelming.
Yeah.
You know, I denied it when my patients were coming in saying the voices are really getting pissed at you, you know, and they're telling me to not come, not to listen what you had to say and to attack you. I denied it there. Then one patient came in and said the voices want to talk to you personally. I'll never forget that day. And I said, well, okay, what do they want to say? He sat down and he said, what came out of his mouth was these words: "You have no right to interfere with our way of life." You know?
A speaking, talking chemical imbalance.
Yeah.
Who would have thought?
That is predictable, that runs the same patterns over and over. A disease that tells the patient not to take the medicines that weaken the disease.
Yeah.
It's kind of like Don Quixote. You know? Just keep charging that friggin' windmill until you beat your head silly, you know?
Yeah.
But it's got to be done. The truth has got to be gotten out. It just has to. You know, and once therapists who realize this, I mean, they can start exploring for themselves and see these things for themselves. You know, if they sit down and they talk to these people, they'll see what we're bringing out. They'll see what we're talking about. It's right there in front of their eyes. And a lot of nurses and psych people go, well, I always suspected there was something behind that, but I just couldn't. I just couldn't buy it. You know, I remember one time on one of the psych units I was working on, the patients they were all doing an exorcist on this other patient. You know, they gathered they gathered in one of these rooms and they were all doing an exorcism on this particularly violent patient. And the nurse found out, and she was kind of going, well, maybe it'll work. And she left it alone. She was fired. She was fired for not stopping it.
Yeah.
They weren't harming this person. So that shows you how entrenched they are in their box program thinking. They will not look outside of that box they've been programmed into. It's just inconceivable that something like this is going on.
Yeah.
So they continue to poison these people with their toxic drugs, saying there is no other treatment, there is no other cure. They won't listen to shamans who have cured this stuff. They just blot them out. They're quackeries. They're fools. They're you know, I don't know.
And that is why we are trying to get the word out.
Well, I appreciate it. It's people. It's people like you and the people, the ground level people, who are open to the truth.
That is the only way change can start.
That's the only way I see it. You know, because I beat my head against psychiatry and psychologists and psych nurses for decades, and it's like beating your head against a friggin' rock.
Yeah.
You know, they're just not open. They just can't see it. And they'll strike back. You know, and they'll strike back. They're like vipers.
Strikes back.
Yeah, it's like you threaten their reality, and it's like, you know, boom.
Yeah.
You know, you're gone. And it's psychiatrists that have all the power. You know, I mean,
Okay. Thank you very much, Jerry, for coming again.
You're more than welcome.
And yeah, guys, we derailed a little bit toward the end, but
I'd be glad to answer any questions your folks might have.
Yeah, sure. Maybe next time we're doing Q&A.
Yeah, that'd be good.
Yeah, so leave any questions underneath the video. I do pay attention to the comments. So have a great time. Take good care of yourselves. And we all see you next time. Bye.
Okay, well, thank you for having me.